Let's talk law. Our resident lawyer, Despina Priala of boutique law firm Priala Legal in Runaway Bay, with us every Thursday to offer her legal expertise. She provides some general advice on the latest hot topics. She has experience that spans more than 25 years in areas of property and commercial law. She also prepares wills as part of estate planning and litigation. Good morning to you, Despina.
Good morning, Wayne. Good morning, Brooke.
Good morning, Despina. So in recent news, 50,000 DPNs have been handed out by the ATO since the 1st of June. So can you explain what exactly is a DPN?
Yes, I would love to, because I think every director out there needs to understand what a DPN is. So a DPN stands for Director Penalty Notice. Okay, and what does that mean and how will it impact directors? So director penalty notices is a notice that the ATO can issue directors personally for the unpaid debts of the company.
The whole company. So any debts that will go directly could go to one person.
Yeah, to the directors. That's so. There's always been this, I suppose, as understanding from directors that when you become a director of a company, of course, you've got this veneer of separation. So you've got the company as a corporate entity on its own, and then you have the directors that sit behind the company, that run the company with the shareholders. So, and then directors often thought, well, if the company has debts, the company as a corporate entity of its own right will be sued, and I won't be sued because I'm a director. So unless I give a personal guarantee from me to someone else that someone can sue me for, I can't be sued if the company has unpaid debts. But that's completely incorrect. Okay. And these DPNs have been around for a while, and it's only been since COVID has come and gone, okay, that the ATO is now pursuing people and issuing these DPNs. And we've talked on the show before about the ATO basically putting a halt on pursuing people, for unpaid debts and debts that are owed to the ATO, particularly, of course, through COVID. And now we've come out of COVID. And I said this on the show, I think a few months ago, that the ATO is pretty much on the warpath, and beware, because if you haven't paid your taxes, they're now going to be pursuing everybody for those taxes.
Yep, so the government wants their money. Now, I understand there's something like 50,000 of these notices that have been issued just in a few months.
Yes, so since the 1st of June, the ATO, it's been reported, has already issued more than 50,000 DPNs. That's a lot of director penalty notices. And I suppose more than ever, what you need to be aware of is that these DPNs are, by law, they can be issued. If you receive a director penalty notice, that means that the ATO is obviously flagged to you, putting it very simply, you've got unpaid company debts. I'm issuing you, Mr. Director X, or Mrs. Director Y, whatever the situation is. Here's a director penalty notice. It's issued to you personally. You now have, the time is 21 days to deal with this notice. So dealing with the notice means you pay all the debts that are owed, right, to the ATO, or perhaps you have some defences, which we can talk about, that are available, although they're very limited, or maybe you actually have to wind up that company, put it into liquidation, because you simply cannot pay these debts and you have no money to pay these debts.
Yeah, and there's actually two kinds of DPNs, isn't there, Despina?
So the first one's called a non-lockdown DPN. So we don't want to get too technical, but what people need to understand is if you get any form of DPN, right, take it seriously.
Don't ignore it. Yeah,
don't ignore
it.
Exactly.
Shove it in the drawer. Yeah.
Exactly. So I suppose the name gives it away. It's called a non-lockdown DPN. So it's not as serious as the other one, which is a lockdown DPN. So a non-lockdown DPN is where you get this notice from the ATO and you're given 21 days. Okay, so you're given 21 days to deal with it and avoid liability. That is, avoid personal liability attaching to you as a director. So the ATO says, look, you've had all these unpaid company debts. I'm going to issue you now non-lockdown DPN. You've now got 21 days. So go and deal with it. So if you haven't lodged your BAS, right, you're out of time, go and deal with that. If you haven't lodged your superannuation guarantee statements, go and do that, okay, and pay all those debts. All right. So if you want to avoid the personal liability, you got to deal with the notice within that 21 days. Okay. You can also do other things like appoint a small business restructuring practitioner. So that's another option if you have debts of under $1 million owed to the ATO. So the point being, if you get it, you've got to see someone, a financial advisor, your accountant, a taxation advisor, a lawyer, and straight away, because the clock starts ticking as soon as you receive that notice. The second one is, as I said before, a lockdown DPN. Bit more serious because you actually
sounds scary.
It's
Yeah, lockdowns.
Yeah,
We know a
lockdowns.
bit
We all
about
know
that. Yeah.
the PTSD in that term. Oh,
is, as I said, it's a more serious because
was
you are
weird.
not.
Desi, hang on,
We'll have
sorry.
to pick it up from your answer, Despina, because you just dropped out totally.
Sorry, it did. Yeah, I didn't know. I'm
Okay,
just gonna.
just from that answer. Yep.
Okay, I'm just gonna, so I know where I stopped. So yeah, the second one is, as I said, is a more serious, and it's called the lockdown, and the name gives it away. So the lockdown DPN does not give you any time period. So there's no 21 days. You are just served as the director personally with an automatic personal liability notice, and it's effective as soon as it's served on the director. Okay, so that's pretty serious. And let's talk a little bit about, well, what company debts are we really talking about? So I said before, this is about the ATO issuing these DPNs, director penalty notices, for unpaid company debts. So maybe it seems obvious, but let's just talk about it and go through it. So the three main ones we're talking about, your PAYG, so you haven't paid any of that. You haven't paid your GST, okay? And you haven't paid your super. Okay, so three big obvious taxes that a lot of companies do fall behind on, and they haven't, kept up to date with those payments. So those are the taxes we're talking about.
All right. So I guess the advice is don't ignore it. If it comes your way, absolutely don't ignore it. But you did mention before that there are a couple of defences. Can we briefly look at those?
We can. So you will have a defence to a claim by the ATO under a DPN if you can establish that the relevant debt was not paid due to one of these reasons. All right. And then it's all about giving that evidence to the ATO, of course. You can't just put your hand up and say, yes, I fall within one of these categories. So one of these is if you were ill. Okay. So if you were ill or another acceptable reason within that realm. So say if you were hospitalized for some time, you were the only director, for example, you had a terminal illness, you suddenly got sick, maybe you had COVID and you were, hospitalized for several weeks, who knows? So that is one of the reasons. Another reason is if you took all reasonable steps to pay the outstanding debt. So if you could show to the ATO, look, I took all these reasonable steps, what were they, to try and pay what I owed to the ATO. Then another reason is if you took steps to appoint a voluntary administrator to wind up the company. Yeah. So that's another reason. And the other one is, of course, if you say, look, I wasn't in control of the company at the time that debts arose. And what I'll say on that point is this, that if you class yourself as a sleeping director, right? So a lot of people say, oh, yes, well, I'm just a quasi director, or I'm not really running the show. Somebody else is doing it, but you're a director. Okay, so ignorance is not an excuse, right? If you're a director and you're in the company, but you're letting someone else run the show, be very careful because of these personal liability notices, director penalty notices that you can be issued with for debts that arise in the company while you are a director. So it's really, really important that you understand that.
Yeah, and especially I know last week we spoke about the new director identification numbers, and those new directors that might be starting their business and getting all excited. This is information that obviously they really have to be all over.
Yes, 100%. And you really, so before you even, as you say, you're right. And then if you're going and thinking about becoming a director of a company, now more than ever, like I said, do your due diligence. Make sure you find out exactly what the company owes and what you're going to be up for potentially as a director, and the financial status of that company is so important before you take that plunge and put your hat on, become a director, and assume all of those liabilities.
Ignorance isn't always bliss. That is
No,
true.
exactly.
Coming up next, what is the legal definition of using your phone on the road in New South Wales?
This will be interesting.
Not Queensland, New South Wales. So listen carefully. Very interesting stuff coming up on Talking Law. You're listening to Radio 97.